Welcome to Product Hunting. The launch of AMD's B550 chipset, PCI Express 4.0, has finally gone mainstream. There are plenty of B550 boards to choose from, including some full-featured varieties with price tags on par with mid-range X570 motherboards. At those price ranges, you may as well opt for an X570 board, as this chipset is more capable than the B550. The affordable B550 alternatives are arguably much more interesting, which brings us to this review of the Gigabyte B550 Gaming X. The launch of AMD's B550 chipset, PCI Express 4.0, has finally gone mainstream. There are plenty of B550 boards to choose from, including some full-featured varieties with price tags on par with mid-range X570 motherboards. At those price ranges, you may as well opt for an X570 board, as this chipset is more capable than the B550. The affordable B550 alternatives are arguably much more interesting, which brings us to this review of the Gigabyte B550 Gaming X. Not much can be said about the design of the board. It's not exactly dazzling, but that is to be expected in this price range. The B550 Gaming X does come with RGB headers if you want to get creative. As for the layout, there are fairly large heatsinks for the VRM and chipset areas, but unfortunately, no M.2 heat spreader. If you are building a system that includes a PCIe Gen 4 M.2 drive, you might want to opt for a model with a heatsink. Motherboard benchmarks are not known to raise eyebrows, as boards with the same chipset, and all other components being equal, tend to perform about the same as long as no overclocking or other tweaking is involved. Testing is nevertheless. The Gigabyte B550 Gaming X is not a high-end motherboard by B550 standards, itself a mainstream chipset. But it's not an overly scaled-down entry-level board either. Number 4, MSI Mag B660M Motor
DDR4, my pick for best Intel-based gaming motherboard. The MSI Mag B660M Mortar Wi-Fi DDR4 is a gaming-oriented micro ATX motherboard constructed around the latest Intel B660 chipset that balances value with cutting-edge hardware and performance. The B660M Mortar Wi-Fi DDR4 follows the military theme of many MSI budget models. The DDR4 version uses a black 6-layer PCB without any patterns or designs. The large silver heatsinks provide a contrast against the board, along with MSI, Mag, and Mortar branding in black. It's a simple look, one that doesn't command attention on its own. The large VRM heatsinks on the top left of the board offer plenty of surface area and mass to effectively keep the power delivery components cool. Sitting between the heatsinks are two 8-pin EPS connectors to power the processor. Off to the right of the socket are four unreinforced single-side locking DRAM slots that support up to 128 GB, with speeds listed up to 48,000 plus MHz. Intel's mainstream chipsets give you an attractive platform to build a system on, and really shows what an inexpensive board is capable of when paired with the i9-12900K and less expensive DDR4. The Mag B660M Mortar Wi-Fi DDR4 may not have the fancy looks or RGB lighting of pricier boards, but does come with everything you need to get the most out of the system stock clocked. The Mortar includes two PCIe 4.0 X4 M.2 sockets, 6 SATA ports, a premium audio solution, and VRMs that easily manage the flagship processor. When it comes to performance, this motherboard is able to fully utilize the i9-12900K processor while costing a third less than most Z690 offerings. Of course, the B660M doesn't give you 4 M.2 sockets, 8 SATA ports, and more robust power delivery, but most people don't need that much connectivity. You don't have to break the bank to get a good motherboard, and if you're in the market for a board that supports Intel-based Alder Lake CPUs, the Mag B660M Mortar Wi-Fi DDR4 is a great choice.
Number 3, MSI MPG X570. Outside of the adequate capacity voltage regulator, though it does a fair job with the basics. We still get PCIe 4.0 to all the board slots, and the audio codec is the same ALC1220 we would expect to find on $200 plus models. And that audio codec still feeds 5 rear panel audio jacks and a front panel HD audio header, because there wouldn't be much value to crippling it with cheaper connectors. Zooming in, we also find a tiny button for flashing the firmware which, lacking the ASIC that allows certain pricier boards to update firmware without certain hardware, seems only a little out of place on a model this inexpensive. We also see a PS/2 port for legacy keyboards and mice, two USB 2.0 ports that we'll assume are for contemporary keyboards and mice, for USB 3 Gen 1 ports, 5 gigabits per second, Type A and Type C Gen 2 ports, 10 gigabits per second, Gigabit Ethernet via a low-cost Realtek controller, and a digital optical audio output. The 3x1 slots are even more limited. Not only do they compete with everything else on the chipset for bandwidth, but the top X1 slot gets disabled whenever a card is detected in the second X1 slot. And that automatic selection explains why we see only one PCI pathway diverting switch on the entire board. Behind the first PCI X1 slot, the MPGX570 Gaming Plus's bottom edge is lined with headers for front panel audio, 1 of 2, RGB cables, TPM, 4 of 6, PWM fan headers, serial COM port, 2 dual-port USB 2.0, 1 of 2, dual-port USB 3.0, and an Intel spec front panel LED/button group. Above those are a factory, reserved, header, chassis intrusion, PC speaker/buzzer, and 1 of 2 RGB headers. The other RGB and ARGB headers are located near the board's upper front corner. Number 2. Asus TUF Gaming. The Asus webpage for the TUF Gaming X570 Pro lists a 12+2 configuration for the core and SoC, which at a high level bodes well for handling our Ryzen 9 5950X. Managing power sent to the MOSFETs is the Asus DG Plus chip, ASP1106 GGQW at X plus Y equals 6. The 6-channel controller works in a 4+1 team setup. This VRM configuration immediately to the right of the fan headers up top is the first RGB header. In this case, it's a 4-pin RGB with the 3-pin ARGB header located to the right of the socket area. Located just above the 3-pin RGB header is the Asus QLED area. QLED consists of 4 LEDs on board that light up during the post-process. If the board hangs on the DRAM, CPU, VGA, or boot devices, swinging around back to the rear I/O, the TUF Gaming X570 Plus Wi-Fi doesn't include an integrated I/O plate, so you'll have to install it. There are 7 USB ports out back, 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C, for USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports and 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports. I'd like to see a couple more USB ports here, as some users could struggle with 7. Outside of that is a clear CMOS button, a legacy PS/2 port, and DisplayPort/HDMI outputs for the integrated video. Last are the Wi-Fi antenna connections and a 5-plug audio stack with SPDIF. Number 1. Gigabyte Z690. We've tested a couple high-end boards for Intel's brand new Alder Lake platform so far. But now we get to dive deep into the first mid-range Z690 board, Gigabyte Z690 Aorus Pro. Priced at $329.99, it's one of the less expensive offerings in the Z690 universe, although there are boards priced as low as $200, but it still has a long feature list enthusiasts should love. There are a whopping 13 total USB ports, 2.5 GB and integrated Wi-Fi 6 for fast networking, 4 M.2 sockets, a premium Realtek audio codec, overbuilt VRMs, and an updated appearance. The new look may be polarizing, with its gray-on-black heatsinks, but overall we like what the Aorus Pro delivers as a package very much. Since this is our first Gigabyte Z690 review, we'll briefly cover the product stack. The Gigabyte website has a mind-blowing 25 models listed across the Aorus, Aero, Gaming X, and UD families. The Aorus line has 15 boards, from the Halo product Aorus Extreme Waterforce, and non-water-cooled Extreme, Tachyon, overclocking-centric, Master, Ultra, Elite, and Pro boards. There's even a mini ITX board, the Z690i Ultra. The Aero line consists of 3 boards, Aero D, Aero G, and Aero D DDR4, that sport a different design aesthetic, white, with hardware geared towards content creators. The Gaming X family has 2 boards, one DDR5, the other DDR4. Finally, the UD series makes up the budget end of things with 5 SKUs.
Please subscribe and like your channel and press the bell icon.